And here I thought I was going to get a while we just taking the McLarens out of this season. Well, I was, but then a wild Max Verstappen entered the championship fight. So, what would the 2025 Formula 1 season look like if the top 3 were not there? As always, like and subscribe if you're going to enjoy this video, and drop a comment down below, let me know what you thought. For the first time since 2019 properly, and not properly since the failed attempt to start the season in 2020, Formula 1 is kicking the season off down in Australia. And it's a bloody incredible start for Mercedes. They have the perfect start in the very changeable conditions that the Albert Park circuit offers up for Formula 1 that weekend. They have a 1-2 from pole position. George Russell winning the race from that pole position spot, and Kimi Antonelli coming through the field to finish second on his Formula 1 debut. Not bad from the 18-year-old. Especially in the changeable conditions that saw basically every other rookie except for Behrman fall apart. And it's a Mercedes power lockout on the podium as Alexander Albon starts his season off brilliantly with giving Williams their first podium since God knows when. Mercedes will be looking to continue that strong form in China, which plays host to the first sprint race of the season. And Ferrari were going to be looking to have a much better weekend than they had in Australia. I mean, it wasn't outright terrible, but 6th and 7th is probably worse than they would have been hoping for and expecting. And to begin with, things do go a lot better for the Italian outfit, as it ends up being Lewis Hamilton winning the sprint race from sprint pole position, as he did in real life, and Leclerc was joining him in the top 3 in 3rd place, with George Russell separating the pair of them. And the Brit in the middle there going on to win the Grand Prix itself from pole position for his 2nd win of the season. Meanwhile, Ferrari, things go okay for them to begin with, as they, at the checkered flag, have a double podium in 2nd and 3rd, until them and Gasly get disqualified, and that ends up handing a podium to Esteban Ocon and Kimi Antonelli. Ocon giving Haas their first podium in Formula 1, and Kimi Antonelli starting his season off, well, kind of reminiscent of the guy he replaced at Mercedes. So it'll be Japan where Ferrari will be hoping to have a much better time of it and get some good results on the board in the Grand Prix. And luckily for them, the luck finally turns their direction, as Charles Leclerc has a brilliant weekend and wins the Grand Prix from pole position to notch up his first podium and his first race win of the season and first pole of the season. George Russell, who's won the first 2 Grand Prix, is in 2nd place, and Kimi Antonelli, who's been on the podium in the first 2 races, is making it 3 for 3 from the first 3 races on the podium. Heading off to Bahrain now, where George Russell comes into it as not the reigning race winner, if that makes any sense, but he's soon going to rectify that as he ends up winning from pole position for the 3rd time in 4 races. Yeah, bit of a trend here of drivers winning from pole position, as was the case in real life actually, and this time it's actually a Ferrari 2-3. No disqualifications for them. It's Leclerc 2nd and Lewis Hamilton getting his first podium on the record books for Ferrari, which, as of recording this on the 7th of November, that hasn't happened yet. He still hasn't got his first Grand Prix podium for Ferrari. Surely to God he'll get there eventually, right? But anyway, Russell's taking his 3rd win of the season, Leclerc's on the podium at one of his best tracks, Hamilton's finally notching his first Ferrari podium onto the record books, and we now head on over to the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix, where there's a little bit less controversy, because there's no Max Verstappen going off at the first corner, or cutting the first chicane rather, and getting a time penalty. Instead, it's George Russell claiming pole position, but Charles Leclerc gets the better of him in the Grand Prix, goes on to take the race win ahead of the Brits, and then Kimi Antonelli making a return to the podium after a slightly off weekend down in Bahrain. And Leclerc gets the fastest lap of the race as well. Not that you get a point for that anymore, but it's a nice thing to have. For a couple of weekends from Monegasque, he'll be looking to continue in Miami for the 2nd sprint race of the season. Of course, that doesn't come his way in the sprint, as he has a DNS after he goes off on the reconnaissance laps. It's instead Hamilton still having a great time in the sprint format. After it stopped raining, that is. Because he takes his 2nd sprint win of the season, 2 for 2 in the sprint races for him so far, ahead of George Russell, who seems to always be in the top 3 in these bloody competitive sessions, and Lance Stroll, I'm not sure how, but he somehow ends up 3rd place. And come the Grand Prix format, Kimi Antonelli, who took pole for the sprint race, becomes Formula 1's youngest ever Grand Prix pole sitter as well, when he takes pole position for the Grand Prix itself, and he translates that not into a race win. It's P3 for him, to a couple places behind his teammate, who takes his, 4th win of the year, and Alex Albon separates the two of them after a brilliant weekend for Williams. Williams have had a very good start to this season, and that shows in the standings. As we take a look at it and see George Russell, he's also had a brilliant brilliant start to the season. He's on 150 points, while his closest competitor is Charles Leclerc on 94. He's a 56-point lead for the Brit. Is he gonna go unchallenged, or can Ferrari just get things together and get some consistency going? They've been getting there. They had that close couple of strong weekends. They could have been closer if they didn't get disqualified in China, but hey ho. Kimi Antonelli's only 4 points behind the Monegasque on 90 points, while Lewis Hamilton and Alex Albon round out the top 5 on 71 and 64 respectively. Esteban Ocon, after having a podium finish so far this season, is on 31 points in 6th place ahead of Lance Stroll on 29. Yuki Tsunoda, who moved teams and went from V-Carb to Red Bull, is currently sitting on 28 points ahead of Isaac Hadjar, who's on 26, and then Carlos Sainz is rounding out the top 10 on 24 points. For the constructors standings, Mercedes have a great lead at the moment on 240 points to Ferrari on 165. Williams are kind of on their own a little bit on 88 points. Williams and Ferrari are kind of on the Mercedes are all kind of on their own at the moment, but it's very early days in this season. We're only 6 rounds into a 24 race season. Anything can happen. There's a long time still for things to close up. Williams are on 88 points ahead of Haas on 54 and Aston Martin on 39. V-Carb are on 35 ahead of Red Bull, who, I'm sorry to the Red Bull fans, this is gonna be a slightly painful video for you. I'm sorry. But they're on 23 points, Alpine are on 22, and then Sauber are on 12. We head now to get underway with the European season at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, which sees George Russell spoiling the Ferrari party in qualifying, as Ferrari are a little bit hopeless in qualifying, as George Russell takes pole position for the Grand Prix, but he is bested in the Grand Prix as Ferrari come out of the gate swinging in the race, and Lewis Hamilton takes what he hasn't managed to do in real life and actually take a race win with Ferrari. But no, Lewis Hamilton in front of the Tifosi at Imola is getting his first Grand Prix victory in red. Not a bad place to take your first win for Ferrari. The only better place would probably be Monza, to be honest. And it's a double Ferrari podium as Leclerc ends up finishing P3 after that late tangle with Alex Albon, who ended up splitting the two Ferraris. Leclerc will be hoping to go better than P3 in Monaco for round 8, his home race, and he does go better, as it's a second consecutive win from pole on the streets of Monaco for the Monegasque, and it is a first Ferrari 1-2 in the season as Hamilton follows him home in second place at a circuit where you can't really overtake, and the FIA's attempt to make the race more interesting by mandating a 2-stop didn't exactly work. But there's more joy on the podium as Isaac Hadjar is getting on the podium as well for his first podium in the sport, as V-Carb used that mandated 2-stop to their full advantage in the race. And with Mercedes being further down the order having a bad weekend, this 1-2 has allowed Ferrari to close right up to Mercedes in the standings. They're now only 8 points behind them on 248 points to Mercedes 256. And the constructors standings, I feel like the constructors fight is going to be the better fight in this season. So I feel like there's probably going to be a bit more of an emphasis on the constructors than the drivers, which is a bit of a twist, because normally I have a bit more of a focus on the drivers and the constructors, but I'm gonna be honest guys, I'm working with what I can, okay? Max getting involved in this championship fight kinda screwed up this video plan a little bit. Seriously, I had 2025 with just no McLaren, mostly done. Then Max happened. Anyway, moving on to the Spanish Grand Prix and my ramblings aside. George Russell is taking pole once again. That man has been a machine in qualifying this year, and well, there's no tangling with Max Verstappen late on in the race because Max Verstappen isn't here. However, at that point in time, Leclerc was already ahead of Russell. So there still would have been that late safety car for Antonelli. Who knows what would have happened? Maybe Russell could have actually passed Leclerc, but we're running with no. It's a victory for Charles Leclerc for the second race in a row ahead of the Brit. And Nico Hülkenberg with a late pass on Lewis Hamilton after that safety car gets on the podium this season. Honestly, name a more iconic duo than this series and Hülkenberg ending up on the podium when he's racing. I'll wait. But Russell being outscored by Leclerc has allowed Leclerc to close up to just one race wins worth of points away. He's 25 points down on his rival in the championship. While in the constructors, Ferrari now overtake Mercedes as they outscore them. They now lead the constructors championship by 11 points. The two teams who have gone head to head for championships in the past, in 2017 and 2018, 2019 to a distant extent, they've gone head to head for second in the last couple of years. They're going head to head for the constructors championship this year, and I have a feel this is going to be a good fight. And with that, we head on over to take a pause in the European season and head to Canada for the Canadian Grand Prix, a track that's going to be a sprint race next year. Honestly, it might actually be pretty good. I'm keen to see how the sprint race works at Canada. But this weekend was, of course, course, a very good one for Mercedes in real life. George Russell won the Grand Prix from pole position, and he still does that here. The only difference is it's now a Mercedes 1-2 with Kimi Antonelli. After a couple of tough races, gets on the podium. He gets a really good race result in, and the two Mercedes are joined on the podium by Charles Leclerc. Leclerc denying it of being a current and former Mercedes podium, if you know what I mean, with Hamilton finishing in 4th place. But that 1-2 means that the Constructors' Championship is changing hands again, as Mercedes retake the lead by 5 points. 317 playing 312. I have a feeling this is not the last time we're going to be seeing the Constructors' Championship change hands. Who knows, it might change hands again as we look to the Austrian Grand Prix for round 11. Honestly, one of my favourite races of the year. I love the Austrian Grand Prix. It's normally pretty freaking good. And it's a track that is honestly one of Leclerc's best tracks throughout his entire racing career. It's a track that he's won at in all of the top 3 categories of motorsport. Formula 3, Formula 2 and Formula 1. And well, he's doing that here this time with a Grand Prix victory from pole position ahead of his teammate for a second Ferrari 1-2 of the season, and they're joined on the podium by George Russell, who has also won round here in the past. And wouldn't you know it, but that 1-2, guess what it's done? That's right, it's changed the hands of the lead of the drive of the Constructors' Championship again. What's that, the 4th time now? In the last 6 races, it's changed hands. Ferrari now lead again on 355 points to Mercedes 11 points back on 344. These teams are not separated by much. They've both had their good races, they've both had their bad races, and I feel like this is going to continue throughout the second half of the season. They're separated by 11 points. Williams have a bit of a more comfortable gap. They're on 128 points to VCarb behind them on 92 as their closest challenger. Williams find themselves in a little bit of no man's land. VCarb, they've got Haas slowly breathing down their neck. They're on 79 points in 5th place, while Aston Martin are on 67. Sauber are sitting on 49 points, Alpine are on 32, and Red Bull are on 31. Honestly, any Red Bull fans here watching, just support VCarb in this video. Just support VCarb. As for the drivers, George Russell still leads that, with Leclerc back to being 1 race wins off the championship lead, 224 playing 199, while Hamilton is on his own on 150, on his own kind of on 156 points. It's a little bit spread out at the top of the Drivers' Championship. It's kind of why I'm putting a bit more of a focus on the Constructors fight, because I feel like that's going to be the better battle here, which is why I've only gone for taking out Max and the McLarens and didn't take out anyone else, because I feel like we can have a really good fight in the Constructors here with just those 3 gone. But there's the gap at the top. We'll see if Leclerc can close up more throughout the second half of the season and give us a proper fight in the Drivers' Championship. Hamilton has a 36-point gap back to Antonelli, the man who replaced him at Mercedes, on 120 points, while Albon runs at the top 5 on 90. Isaac Hadjar is on 59 points, so Esteban Ocon has 51, Hulkenberg has 41, Sainz has 38, and Alonso also has 38. It's all tied up at the bottom end of the top 10 between the 2 Spanish drivers, but Sainz is ahead on countback. And with that being said, let's head on over to the home race of the championship leader and what was the home of the first ever Formula 1 Grand Prix, Silverstone, the United Kingdom. I was about to say the United Kingdom Grand Prix. That's not what it's called. It's called the British Grand Prix. The British Grand Prix was arguably one of the best races of the season, if not the best race of the season. Changeable conditions, surprise podium, and that surprise podium turned into a surprise race victory, as George Russell, after taking pole position, only finishes in 7th place, while Nico Hulkenberg goes from the back of the grid to the front to deny Lewis Hamilton of an I don't know how manyth win at Silverstone to take the Grand Prix victory himself. His first ever race win in Formula 1 in spectacular fashion, to be quite frankly honest. But Lewis Hamilton does still get a podium finish in the end with 2nd place, and another surprise podium. Pierre Gasly gets 3rd place in an Alpine car that's been pretty freaking hopeless. But those 3 drivers honestly taking full advantage of the championship contenders being a little bit out of it. They both had a bad weekend, and they'll be looking to bounce back at the Belgian Grand Prix, which is the third sprint weekend of the year. I was about to say 2nd, 3rd, 4th. It was the 3rd one. And it ends up being a perfect weekend for Charles Leclerc, as he ends up taking pole position for the sprint race that he translates into a sprint race victory. Belgium is another one of his strongest tracks. We move on from the sprint race, where Leclerc wins from Ocon and Sainz, onwards to the Grand Prix, where Leclerc's form continues at this circuit. He wins from pole position again, outscoring his championship rival in George Russell, which is going to help him, and Alex Albon rounds out the podium in 3rd place. And what do you know, that race win from Leclerc gets him to the closest he's been to Russell pretty much all season, 16 points behind for driver number 16, 232 for him, and 248 for George Russell. Helping him out in the Driver Championship to try and get a lot closer to Russell and make it a good fight there as well. But it's extended. Ferrari is leading the Constructors, Ferrari winning, and then Hamilton in 4th place. Their strong form has allowed them to get now a 50-point lead over Mercedes. They're on 418 and Mercedes are on 368. There's still a lot of races left to go. There's still 10 races left in this season, so anything can happen in Formula 1, and I'm sure it will. We move to the last race before the summer break, the Hungarian Grand Prix. Charles Leclerc took a surprise pole here in real life. He takes pole still here, and that scrap with Russell for 3rd place in real life turns into a scrap for the race victory here, and it still ends up being the same way it actually did, with George Russell getting the better of him, Leclerc getting a time penalty, but it didn't affect his position. He finishes in 2nd, managing to stay ahead of Fernando Alonso, who finishes in 3rd place to get a podium because of freaking course he does. Of course Fernando Alonso's going to be here somewhere. The man always appears somewhere. While George Russell takes his 6th race victory of the season to further extend his lead out before F1 heads off for the summer break, and then when F1 reconvenes, it's at Zandvoort for the Dutch Grand Prix. We've seen surprise winners already this season, but we're seeing another one. And as a surprise pole sitter as well, as Isaac Hadjar was brilliant this weekend in real life. It's even better for him here, as his 4th place in qualifying ends up actually now being a pole position for the young Frenchman in his rookie season, taking a pole position and translating that into a race victory in the end. Stunning weekend for the young Frenchman, becoming one of Formula 1's youngest winners, his 2nd youngest winner, if I'm not mistaken. I think, yeah, that would be 2nd youngest race winner ever, ahead of Russell and Albon, rounding out the podium. And even though George Russell was the only Mercedes to score points, it still means that Ferrari don't have as big of a lead now in the Constructors as they once did. That, and combined with Mercedes having a good weekend in Hungary, means they're now only 21 points off of Ferrari now in the Constructors Championship fight. At the Italian Grand Prix, Ferrari are going to want to make sure that gap does not extend out any further. And it starts out absolutely brilliantly with Charles Leclerc taking pole position at the Italian Grand Prix, giving the Ferrari fans really something to cheer at. And I'll tell you something, I wouldn't have wanted to be the guy trying to overtake him on race day at Monza in P1. Leclerc's teammate Lewis Hamilton knows all about trying to overtake Leclerc for the lead at Monza. He tried in 2019 and he freaking failed. And George Russell fails again here as Leclerc gives Ferrari a 2nd consecutive Italian Grand Prix victory, his 3rd win at the Italian Grand Prix. And Hamilton joins him on the podium for a 1-3 at home, their 2nd home race of the season, and it's another 1-3 for them, with George Russell separating the two this time. Still a Mercedes powered car, but this time it's Russell and not Albon. And Leclerc gets the fastest lap as well, so it's almost a perfect weekend for Ferrari, which is going to be hugely beneficial for them in the Constructors Championship to get a bit more of a comfortable lead out now. A 35-point gap they have to Mercedes, 478 points playing 443. It's a comfortable lead to have. I say comfortable, it's a good lead to have. You know, anything can still happen. There's still 8 races left, and anything can change. You've seen how quickly things have been changing in this season. The lead changed like 4 times in the span of 6 races earlier in this video. Anything can happen, and it will. But away from the front, Williams are still kind of keeping the same kind of gap to VCarb. They're on 195 points to VCarb on 152, while Aston Martin are 22 points behind that on 130. They're a little bit closer to Haas, who are on 118, while Sauber are 10 points behind them on 108, and Alpine are still in 8th on 54 points, and Red Bull are still in Spain without the S. As for the Drivers' Championship fight, the fight at the top isn't actually far squint of the gap in the Constructors' Championship. Russell is leading on 309 points. He's having a very solid season, as is Leclerc, just with a couple of extra problems thrown in. He's had his disqualification, which hasn't helped Mars. He had that DNF. He had a crap weekend in Silverstone. Although, mind you, the race didn't pan out brilliantly for Russell either, but at least Russell scored points. But it means the gap between them is now 34 points in Russell's favour. Bit of a spread out fight, but at the end of the day, Leclerc isn't exactly under threat either, as Hamilton done 203 points, so the gap is pretty freaking big there. It's big behind Hamilton as well. It's now Albon in 4th place on 142 points to Antonelli, 8 points back on 134. That fight for 4th place could get pretty good if Albon can keep up. We'll have to see what Williams can do. But it's Isaac Hadjar in 6th place on 98 points to Hülkenberg in 7th on 69. Also on 69 points is Fernando Alonso, but Hülkenberg is ahead on countback. Ocon is in 9th place on 63, and Stroll is 10th on 61. Time for flyaway season as we head to round 17 for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. A race which sees a surprise pole sitter in Carlos Sainz taking Williams' first pole in quite a while. He puts up the best fight he can on race day, but in the end, George Russell and Mercedes get the better of him, and George Russell goes on to take the race victory ahead of the Spanish driver, while Antonelli makes a Mercedes-powered podium completely in a Mercedes 1-3, which is going to be very beneficial for Mercedes in the championship, especially with Ferrari only finishing in 6th and 7th place. The Constructors' Championship is now closed up again. It's closed up with Ferrari only having a 9-point lead over Mercedes, 492 playing 483. And as we head on over to Singapore, then, well, that gap is gonna completely go, because of course George Russell won the Grand Prix from pole position in real life this weekend, and of course that's gonna be completely unaffected by the removal of the top three. He still wins it from pole position here, but it's now a Mercedes 1-2 with Charles Leclerc joining them on the podium to at least give Ferrari a podium, while Hamilton gets a 5-second penalty that drops him to 5th place behind Mr. Fernando, I don't believe it, Alonso. And as alluded, that completely flips the gap in the Constructors' Championship. It's still a 9-point gap, but it's now in Mercedes' favour. Mercedes now lead the Constructors on 526 points to Ferrari on 517. Also, how many times has the lead of the Constructors' Championship changed in this freaking video? I make that as like the 4th time this season that the lead of the championship has changed, I think. Good lord, the constructors in this video. The drivers ain't as close. George Russell, driver number 63, has a 63-point lead over Charles Leclerc. The last couple of rounds have been very, very good for Russell, taking advantage of Ferrari not being as good in the last couple of race weekends. Is 63-point lead nowhere near enough to win the championship at the United States Grand Prix, which is a sprint weekend, so there's more points on offer. It's a sprint weekend that sees Nico Hülkenberg give Sauber a surprise sprint race pole position, and without McLaren there, him not tangling with them, you could argue he very well could have finished in the sprint race points, but he's still in a Sauber. He was decent on race day, but again, he's in a Sauber, so let's just assume he still falls back. George Russell goes on to take the sprint race victory ahead of Carlos Sainz and Lewis Hamilton. Ferrari much better so far this weekend, getting a 3-4 from the sprint race, and as we look ahead to the Grand Prix, that form is only going to continue and is going to grow even stronger as Charles Leclerc takes pole position at a race that he won in 2024, and it's a race he's winning in 2025 again. He wins the United States Grand Prix from pole position ahead of his teammate Lewis Hamilton to give Ferrari their 3rd 1-2 of the season, I believe it is. A very, very strong weekend for the Italian outfit, and George Russell finishing in 3rd place, losing 10 points to his championship rival. However, his lead is still going to be 53 points, so I don't think Russell will be complaining too much. Well, he might be complaining about the Constructors' Championship because, yep, you guessed it, it's changed hands again. Well, the 5 times now this season. Ferrari now lead again on 571 points to Mercedes on 552. Imagine if the Constructors' Championship lead actually changed hands this many times in a season in real life. Imagine watching this Constructors' Championship battle. That would be insane. But anyway, we now head on down to the Mexico City Grand Prix, where Ferrari take a front row lockout in qualifying, and things would have been a little bit different to real life. God knows what would have happened at turn 1. However, it probably would have been a whole lot less controversial. Leclerc would have gone on to win the Grand Prix here, I think, with Lewis Hamilton in 2nd place, not getting a penalty for scampering over the grass in his scraps with Max Verstappen, because Max Verstappen ain't here. And Ollie Behrman, he had a very, very strong weekend. God knows what would have happened with him, but let's just assume he still ends up finishing in 3rd place to get his first podium finish in Formula 1 for the young Brit. The Ferrari youngster, he could very well be in Ferrari within the next couple of years. You have to imagine he will be. But this is a weekend that's been very, very good for Ferrari, with neither Mercedes on the podium. They've outscored them in consecutive weekends. It's allowed them to get a 43-point lead in the Constructors' Championship with only, 4 race weekends left after this one. That's a good lead to have at this point of the season. Surely there's no way Ferrari are gonna throw this away. Right? You can already see where this is going, can't you? And in the Drivers' Championship, it's actually the same gap. It's a 43-point lead that Russell has. Leclerc's brought that down a bit. He's going out fighting. You gotta give him credit for that. He's going out fighting. The gap isn't big enough for Russell to win the championship at the Brazilian Grand Prix. However, he can really put one hand on the Drivers' Championship trophy this weekend, providing he has a strong weekend. It's a strong weekend for his teammate Kimi Antonelli, who has his best weekend of the season. He takes pole for the sprint race and goes on to win it ahead of his teammates and Leclerc. Mercedes very well might have employed team orders. They might have swapped them. God knows they have done that in the past. However, Russell does have a very good lead, and you have to keep in mind that Mercedes are trying to win the Constructors' Championship as well. So if Antonelli was the quicker driver, then it would make sense to keep him ahead, if you know what I mean. Information is going to be vital to keep in mind as we head on over to the Grand Prix, where with no Oscar Piastri, Charles Leclerc is still in the Grand Prix. Most likely anyway. Because, I mean, there's no Piastri to crash into Antonelli to and sending him into the side of Leclerc. So Leclerc's still in the race. Where does he finish? I'm sticking in P3 and we're gonna be done with it. Behind the two Mercedes drivers is Kimi Antonelli wins from pole position in the end, ahead of George Russell. Again, similar thing as I said for the sprint, they might have swapped them, implemented team orders. However, if Antonelli was the quicker driver and he generally was the better Mercedes driver this weekend, it would make sense for them to keep him ahead. But Mercedes' strong weekend has brought the lead in the Constructors' Championship down dramatically. It's now just a 7-point lead that Ferrari have over the British-based German team. 639 playing 632. And while we're on the championships, as we head on to the Las Vegas Grand Prix, the final race in the Americas of the season, for the Drivers' Championship, the gap is 47 points, and George Russell can win it this weekend. With 58 points left available after this weekend, if he can outscore Charles Leclerc by 12 points or more across this weekend, then George Russell will be champion for the first time ever. So basically, win with Leclerc fourth or lower, if I'm thinking this correctly. And in the end, George Russell does win the Grand Prix. He doesn't take pole position. That's Carlos Sainz taking his second pole position of the year. However, it's not quite enough in the end for a podium, but he has to settle for P4. While Charles Leclerc, I think we get second ahead of Antonelli. In real life, then, Leclerc did not manage to get ahead of Antonelli with the penalty. However, with no Oscar Piastri there, it was 2/10 in the end anyway, in real life, that Leclerc missed out on getting ahead of Antonelli. But I think he might have had a really good chance of actually being close enough to be ahead of him without Piastri there. So Leclerc second, Antonelli third. Not enough for the championship, for the Drivers' Championship. So that goes on to the Qatar Grand Prix, the penultimate race weekend of the year, where George Russell really just needs to outscore Leclerc or finish within 28 points of him. However, that's not all, because, yep, you guessed it, the Constructors' Championship has changed hands again. For the 6th time this year, I think, the Constructors' Championship lead has changed, and Mercedes now have a 9-point lead over Ferrari. They're on 672 points to Ferrari's 663. And with only 43 points left available after this weekend, obviously, there's only one race weekend left, Mercedes can win the Constructors' Championship this weekend if they outscore Ferrari by 35 points or more. They need to have a pretty damn good weekend and hope Ferrari have a bad weekend. And it's a sprint weekend as well, so that's really going to help Mercedes in their quest, and they're solid in the sprint, with George Russell taking pole position and converting that into a race victory, while Yuki Tsunoda gives Red Bull what I think might be their first top 3 in a competitive session of the season. We're at the penultimate race of the season, guys. This video has been a painful one for you Tsunoda and Red Bull fans, I swear. But Antonelli finishing in P3 and neither Ferrari in the top 8 is going to be great for Mercedes. They outscore Ferrari by 14 points there, and George Russell outscores Leclerc by 8. And if you do the maths, then that would put him 62 points ahead of Leclerc, with now just 50 left available. That's it for the Drivers' Championship. George Russell, with technically 2 races to go, technically, because we're not done the Grand Prix yet, he is world champion after the sprint race in Qatar. 452 points for him and 390 for Leclerc so far. 62-point gap. It's over. It's done. Leclerc put up a good fight, but Russell's come out on top in the end. And with that, we head on over to the Grand Prix, where Ferrari are going to be out to try and do everything they can to at least try and take the Constructors' Championship to the last race. However, Mercedes' strong form continues as George Russell takes pole position again, but he doesn't win. It ends up being Carlos Sainz giving Williams a race victory. For the first time since Pastor Maldonado in 2012, Williams are winning a Grand Prix after a brilliant race for the Spanish driver. He's leading home, and it's the Italian driver, Kimi Antonelli, and George Russell in 3rd place. And with the Ferrari boys coming home in 5th and 9th place respectively, that gives Mercedes exactly the points they needed. With a 44-point gap and 43 left available, the Constructors' Championship is done. It's over. It's won by Mercedes for the 9th time, I think this would be. Brilliant fight between the two teams this season, but in the end, Ferrari fucked it. It's all wise to put it, Ferrari just completely fucked it. So that means we can look at other battles going on heading into the final race of the season, and there is some going on. Like the battle for 6th place currently, which is currently being held by Isaac Hadjar on 129 points, but he's got Carlos Sainz not that far behind him. It's only a 7-point gap back to him on 122, and Fernando Alonso is still within striking distance on 110 points. It would be a long shot for Alonso to get involved there. However, nothing would surprise me with Fernando Alonso, quite quite frankly. And with some of the surprise wins and podiums we've had this season, nothing would surprise me if he did, like, win the Grand Prix, for example. Alonso's more so going to be looking behind him, though, to Ollie Behrman and Nico Hülkenberg. Ollie Behrman, specifically, in 9th place on 101 points, is within striking distance with a strong weekend, and Behrman's had some strong weekends. He could absolutely steal 8th place from Fernando Alonso, but Behrman has Hülkenberg to consider on 93 points, while who he himself actually has the Battle of the Bulls to consider. Although, mind you, they're probably going to be more focused on each other, with Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson separated by just 1 point in the fight for 11th place. 83 for Tsunoda, playing 82 for Lawson. The two drivers who've driven for Red Bull this year, scrapping it out over the freaking first place outside. I was going to say the Wooden Spoon Award, but no, that's being won by Jack Doohan. They're fighting out for the first spot outside the top 10. Elsewhere, there's no battles going on up in the top half of the grid. Antonelli could overtake Hamilton if he won the race and if Hamilton failed to score in the battle for 3rd place. And again, nothing would surprise me, but that's a distant battle. Albon is secure in 5th place, and then of course there's the two up at the top of the championship. I've mentioned them already. They're currently separated with 67 points fights over. Russell's won it on 467 points, Leclerc has 400, and meanwhile in the constructors, there's not too much going on except for a hell of a scrap between Aston Martin and Haas for 5th place. 180 points for Aston Martin, playing 177 for Haas. That is one hell of a scrap right there. And that one honestly could swing either direction. Both teams have had strong weekends. Both teams have drivers who've had brilliant performances. We'll have to see what happens there. And meanwhile, Alpine are going to be trying to not win the Wooden Spoon Award by getting back ahead of Red Bull, who have finally pulled themselves off the bottom of the bloody table. Elsewhere, 3rd place is being secured by Williams on 274 points. 4th place is VCarb on 218. They're secure. Then there is, of course, the aforementioned Aston Martin and Haas. Sauber are secure in 7th on 142, and then there is of course the Wooden Spoon Award battle I mentioned. So with that, let's head on over to Abu Dhabi, where George Russell caps off a brilliant season with pole position for the Grand Prix. Brilliant way to cap off a season. However, in the end, Leclerc gets the better of him. He had a really strong drive in Abu Dhabi, and he takes the race victory as Ferrari recover from a difficult weekend in Qatar to have a good weekend in Abu Dhabi, with Hamilton coming back to 5th place as well from the back of the grid. Not that bad for him, actually. Fernando Alonso's 3rd place finish, with Lance Stroll also finishing in 7th place. That seals 5th place for Aston Martin in the Constructors' Championship, despite Haas having a strong weekend with Esteban Ocon getting a 4th place finish, and in fact double points with Behrman scoring points as well. In fact, Alonso's 3rd place finish with Sainz finishing down in 10th also means that Alonso managed to get ahead of his countrymen and finish in 7th place in the championship, while Isaac Hadjar does just about hold on to 6th place. So with that, here's the final standings for the championship. George Russell wins the championship on 485 points, while Leclerc ends off 60 points down on him on 425. Lewis Hamilton rounds out a kind of lonely season, up and down season in 3rd place on 285 points, while Kimi Antonelli did not score in the final race and finishes on 252 points. Alex Albon had a strong season and he rounds out the top 5 on 152 points, but Isaac Hadjar holds on to be the 2nd highest finishing rookie of the season on 129 points, while Fernando Alonso, who is always involved somehow, ends on 125 points, beating out his fellow Spaniard Carlos Sainz, who finishes 8th place on 123 points. Oliver Behrman caps off an impressive rookie campaign on 103 points, while Nico Hülkenberg steals the final place in the top 10 on 99 points. Yuki Tsunoda was on 90 points heading into the final race of the season, not 83. I was looking at the wrong total. He fails to score in the final race, but he still finishes in 11th place ahead of Esteban Ocon, who just misses out on stealing that 11th place. He gets 88 points, while Liam Lawson, who was on 84 points, not 82 again, I was looking at the wrong total, he finishes in 13th place ahead of Lance Stroll on 76 points, and then Pierre Gasly scores 58 points in that tractor of an Alpine car. Gabriel Bortoleto had an impressive season considering he's in a Sauber on 53 points. Franco Colapinto only scored 2 points all year, while Jack Doohan, who only did about 6 races, scores 1 solitary point. In the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes win out the grueling fight they had with Ferrari. Ferrari led it for most of the season. I think they led it the most, but Mercedes win out in the end on 737 points to Ferrari, ending just 27 points behind them on 710. They had a strong final weekend, but they kind of fucked it in Abu Dhabi and Qatar. Vegas and Qatar, rather, I'm not gonna lie. Third place was taken by Williams on 275 points, while in fourth place it was VCAR, being the highest scoring Red Bull team of the year, as Aston Martin managed to hold on to fifth place on 201 points, while Haas have to settle for sixth place on 191. Seventh is where you're going to find Sauber on 152. Red Bull were glued to the bottom of the table all year, but they managed to not finish exactly last, and they've now finished second last in 8th place on 85 points, while Alpine has scored just 61 points all year and win the Wooden Spoon Award. Here's your end of season stats. The most wins this year were actually taken by Charles Leclerc with 10 race wins this season, one more than eventual champion George Russell, who scored 9, while Lewis Hamilton, Kimi Antonelli, Isaac Hadjar, Carlos Sainz, and Nico Hülkenberg all scored just 1 win each all year. For the podiums, George Russell stood on the podium 20 times after a very consistent season for the British driver, while Leclerc had 17 podiums this year, after again a consistent season when Ferrari didn't Ferrari him. Kimi Antonelli took 11 podiums in his rookie campaign, while Lewis Hamilton had 8 podiums this year. Alex Albon took 5 for Williams. Hadjar, Alonso, Sainz, and Hülkenberg all took 2, while Behrman, Ocon, and Gasly all took 1 each. For pole position, George Russell was the pole position king this year with 11 poles across the season, beating out Leclerc by 3 poles, who took 8 poles this year. Kimi Antonelli and Carlos Sainz had 2 each, and then Isaac Hadjar had 1. While for the sprint race victories, George Russell and Lewis Hamilton are tied with 2 wins apiece, while Leclerc had 1, and so did Antonelli. And with that, 2025 without the top 3 is at an end. That's what would have happened. Was it the most thrilling fight drivers-wise? No. But was it a thrilling fight constructors-wise? Abso-freaking-lutely yes. Ended 1 race early, however that was a thrilling constructors battle. Anyway, I will leave this one here. I hope you all have a lovely Christmas. Those who do not celebrate Christmas, I hope you have a lovely holiday season. Let me get your thoughts down in the comments below. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you're new around here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.